Mikel Arteta's decision to go with Kepa Arrizabalaga in goal backfired as Arsenal lost the Carabao Cup final against Manchester City by 2-0. It's a decision that he will live to regret, perhaps, even though he may not come out to admit it to the rest of the world. In any case, he actually defended that same decision in the aftermath of that result. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. I know it was a weekend of jubilations for Manchester City, while it was a weekend of commiserations for the Arsenal fans who lost out on the another piece of silverware, which would have been their first in 6 years. So they continue to go trophyless, but all hope perhaps is not lost. We are here to understand why Arsenal lost the Carabao Cup final, or on what fronts did they lose the Carabao Cup final, because I thought it was about 3 or 4 fronts on which they lost that. So for me, in a nutshell, it was Mikel Arteta's decision to go with his second choice goalkeeper, Kepa Arrizabalaga, that cost him the Carabao Cup final. Yes, it was the former Chelsea goalkeeper that fumbled the cross from Rancheki in the 60th minute before Nico O'Reilly went on to score. Now, we've not known Mikel Arteta to be a sentimental manager. In any case, he's been one known to be ruthless, that when you make a mistake or you make a costly error in his team, he has no reason whatsoever to keep you on the pitch. He will drop you. For those of you that can't remember, earlier on in the season when they lost to Aston Villa by 2-1, Eberechi Eze was suspect of not tracking back against Matty Cash, and therefore he went on to score, which gave Aston Villa at the time the lead before Leandro Trossard scored the equalizer in that game, and eventually they lost it with Emi Buendia's last-minute goal. In the aftermath of that game, Eberechi Eze did not start a Premier League game in over a month, and whereas Mikel Arteta tried to justify it by saying he had played a whole chunk of games at that stage in the season for the first time in his career, we knew in the outside world that it was partly because of that mistake, or that is the reason as to why he had been dropped. Now, to be fair, the argument was Kepa Arrizabalaga has played in this competition, he's brought them thus far to the final, but it's a final. You're desperate to win a final. You want to win your first piece of silverware in 6 years. You've not won anything in this project that you've been building. So for those of you that care to remember, in the preview, I said the stakes were too high, a stage too big for Arsenal to afford any complacency whatsoever, that mistakes will be punished. And it was indeed, mistakes were punished. So Mikel Arteta's decision to go with his number 2 choice goalkeeper and Kepa Arrizabalaga backfired. I mean, it's a final. Why not play with your first goalkeeper? Now, a lot of people are going to make the counter argument of, well, Manchester City played their number 2 goalkeeper. Forget not, guys, that Manchester City signed James Trafford from Burnley. They were resigning him back, having let him go to Burnley, I think, in the summer of 2023, as their number 1 goalkeeper. That was the objective. That was the intention in letting go of Ederson Morales. Now, and for those of you that remember, he started the first Premier League 3 games of the season. So he was brought in as the number 1 goalkeeper. But suddenly, Gianluigi Donnarumma became available on the market, and Manchester City were already looking to part ways with Stefan Ortega. So they brought in Gianluigi Donnarumma. Now we know that in terms of seniority, in terms of experience, in terms of who is a better goalkeeper, Gianluigi Donnarumma is better than James Trafford. It's just a statement of fact. So therefore, Gianluigi Donnarumma was not going to be number 2 to an understudy James Trafford, who is what, only 23 years of age? Of course, Gianluigi Donnarumma is about what, 26 thereabout. So that's what changed the dynamics for Manchester City. But James Trafford was always a good goalkeeper, and that's why you remember in that very game he had a triple save, twice of Bukayo Saka and another of Kai Havertz in the first half. So he is good enough a goalkeeper, to the extent that Manchester City were looking at him as their long-term number 1 goalkeeper going forward, moving on from Ederson Morales. So I thought that's the decision that cost Mikel Arteta the final. That's the decision that cost him the game. However, it's not entirely, or it's not only that decision. Now, like I said, Mikel Arteta, when he was asked about this or being criticized for making this decision, he said, I understand, but I have to do what is right and fair. Remember when I said he is not known to be sentimental. When he says, I have to do what is right, first of all, I do not think what he did was right. Remember, we had this argument about who should start in Arsenal goal, and I was telling you, for me, if it had to be my decision, it would be David Raya all day, because there's a reason as to why he's number one and Kepa is number two. But when he goes ahead to say unfair, since when is it about fairness? It's about choosing the right player for the right game at the right time. And this time around, Mikel Arteta chose the wrong player for the wrong game for the wrong time. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. So he goes on to say that Kepa had played all the competition. I think it would have been unfair to him and the team to do something different. He had gone all the way through this competition. Errors are part of football, and unfortunately, it happened today at a crucial moment. Now, errors are part of the game. But when he says he had gone all the way through this competition, how many outfield players have been playing in Arsenal's Cup competitions that never got a chance to play in this final? How many? Where was Miles Lewis Kelly in this game? Where was Christian Nogard in this game? Because they have played all the way in these Cup competitions. They have played a key part in these Cup competitions. Of course, at the semi-finals, he made some changes, again to suit, the opponent, because he knew that the stage was too big. It's what separates the manager from us. That that when I'm going to go up against Chelsea, it's different from facing Crystal Palace. It's different from facing Brighton. It's at the initial stages of the competition. When they play Southampton later on, he will know that he cannot play with the back three of Mari Solomon, Pierre Hincapié, and Christian Mosquera going against Southampton the way he started the game against Mansfield. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you the manager. Choosing the right players at the right time for the right game. So I thought he got that one wrong from the onset. And it's why they lost the title. He fumbled it. Even in the second goal, I thought he could have done enough to save that ball, but he did not. Then two, Mikel Arteta was again culprit in his delayed substitutions. First starting with Pierre Hincapié. First of all, Pierre Hincapié got a yellow card in the 16th minute. I think for roughing up somebody. And from there on, he never looked comfortable in the game. Why? Because he became too cautious, wanting to avoid getting a second yellow that it cost him his biggest element of the game. Pierre Hincapié is known to be aggressive. He's an aggressive player. He goes into battles, he's physical, he's going to shove you, he's going to push you in the right way, in the context of, fighting duels. But after getting that yellow card, he was almost non-committal to challenges. He went with caution. And I remember a point in the game where he was striking Rancheki. He went up to him, sort of clipped him a bit, and on the third attempt, he withdrew. Why? He's trying to avoid getting a second booking, which would cost him, to be sent off and then have his side be reduced to 10 men. And so that caused him to have overall a bad game. And I do not blame him for being cautious, because if, let's say, at one opportunity he goes into a challenge, because the difference between getting a tackle right and wrong can be a microsecond or just 1 second. That's what it could take. That you come in a challenge, well calculated, but you just half a second late. And therefore, you take out the man instead of the ball, So, and then we'll all be criticizing him, saying, how dare you do that when you know you're already on a booking? You cannot do that. It's you made the referee's decision simple to send you off. So he wanted to avoid that because he knew it's a final. It's too big an occasion to let his teammates down in possibly getting sent off, and they have the team reduced to 10 men, especially against the Manchester City side. So he played with caution, and therefore it was uncomfortable for him. And that's how Arsenal conceded a cross in the 60th minute. Now, once they concede that goal, of course, Kepa Arrizabalaga fumbling the ball, Mikel Arteta wants to make the change. A change that I thought he should have done at halftime. That's when I thought he should have done it. Because even by halftime, Hincapié was already looking uncomfortable because he knew the stakes were too high. He knew that any mistake, any mistimed challenge, he was going to get sent off. So he should have made the decision at halftime. So that delayed substitution cost him the game. Because as he prepares to bring him on, to bring on Karafiori alongside Noni Madueke for Kai Havertz, who had a bad game, by the way, then they concede the second, and then the game is gone. The final is done, and that's it. So those were the two managerial decisions that I thought cost Arsenal the game. But also moving forward, after you've gone to two goals down in the final, what do you have to lose? Why do you then need to delay the substitutions of players like Ben White, who was equally struggling against Jeremy Doku? I thought maybe Mosquera could have come on because I wanted Zubimendi swapped out, and then Arsenal have fresh legs in there. Why are you taking so long to take off Leandro Trossard to bring on a Martinelli, a Gabriel Jesus, and Victor Gyökeres was not having a good game? Victor Gyökeres had 0 shots on goal. I think completed about 3 or 4 passes, according to some statistics. I mean, that assessment should be good enough for a manager to say, I need to make these changes as early as the 70th minute. But he waits until the 82nd minute. That's when he makes those changes. So he was wrong about playing Kepa Arrizabalaga, delayed the substitution of Pierre Hincapié, and then the subsequent attacking decisions that he made later on. It was Gabriel Jesus that hit the crossbar in that, a second half. Ricardo Karafiori hit the best of the upright. I'm not saying there was a guarantee that if he had brought them on earlier, he would have scored, but he needed fresh energy. First of all, his team was having to defend deep. They needed some fresh legs. So he got those decisions wrong. Now, 2, or other reasons. Whereas Manchester City played really, really well, and Jeremy Doku had a good game, Ryan Cherki had a good game, Kushanov had a good game, Nathan Ake had a good game, O'Reilly had a good game, man of the match performance, scoring those 2 goals. But Manchester City had only 2 shots on target, by the way. And what does that mean? That Arsenal defended really, really well. They were disciplined enough to defend well until they were let down by their own goalkeeper. But also, they defended well, and it came in some phases of the game at the expense of going forward. In other words, they were too cautious not to lose it, that they were not ambitious enough to risk it to go on the offense. They struggled to come out of the bag. In the second half, Arsenal did not play a progressive pass until the 71st minute. In fact, it's after they've gone 2 goals down, about almost 6-7 minutes later, that then they start to get themselves on the ball and getting forward. Manchester City kept them pinned back, and they placed about 3 players in Kushanov, I think Matthias Nunes, and possibly, who was it? Nathan Ake at the center. And every time Arsenal cleared the ball, it fell to these 3 guys, and they played it back. So, and Kepa Arrizabalaga, I'll keep going back to him, he struggled to deal with crosses. The first one, he tries to catch it, lets loose. When you look at the second goal, it's almost a replica of the second, only that this time around, Kepa does not get a touch of the ball. First of all, when you look at the ball being crossed in by Matthias Nunes, I think the goalkeeper, Kepa, judges that it's too far out for me to venture to go for it. But then how he readjusts to position himself in goal for whatever resultant action is going to be from that cross is a bit poor, because I thought he should have done enough to at least put his hand to that to make a save. When you're a goalkeeper in a cup final, you expect to come up with a moment of brilliance, and he did not produce that, on the occasions when he was called into action. So at the end of it all, he cost his team. Then, Arsenal lacked creativity. They really, really missed Ebeleche Eze. They missed Martin Odegaard. They missed that player in midfield. They missed the maverick, the Ebeleche Eze, who has had hit in form in recent games. I think when you go back to their game against Everton and their game against Bayer Leverkusen in the reverse fixture, the UEFA Champions League, he was one of the standout performers. In fact, I thought in that Bayer Leverkusen game, he deserved man of the match. So that's how good he's been. And unfortunately for them, he suffered a calf injury that he had to sit this one out. As if that wasn't bad enough, Martin Odegaard could not return in time to even have 20 minutes in this game. You never know, maybe he could have made the difference. So, in a game where you lack the creativity, when you do not create enough chances, you must be clinical with the few that you create. And that takes us back to the Kai Havertz chance / Bukayo Saka. James Trafford rose to the occasion and saved that. So they missed that. And they struggled to create other goal-scoring opportunities. They fell far between. They could not rely on set pieces because they equally came far between. I think they had about 4 corners in the game and a couple of free kicks here and there, and they could not make it count. So there's that. So, but to be fair, Manchester City were really, really brilliant. In that opening 25 minutes of the second half, they were really, really, really brilliant in terms of attacking, in terms of being dominant on the ball, because they were not just dominant on the ball for the sake of dominating possession. They were dominant on the ball while pushing forward, while attacking this Arsenal side. They invaded that box. Arsenal had to really, really defend well. They had to stay disciplined in that game, which they did until they collapsed. Of course, thanks to Kepa. So for me, those are the reasons as to why I think particularly Arsenal lost this Carabao Cup final, So they had their moments, but those moments fell far between. But I think he's got to take this one in. The same way you felt that the occasion was too big for the likes of Miles Lewis Kelly, because if your argument is it's a cup competition, then why didn't he play Miles Lewis Kelly at left back or even in midfield? Why did we see Christian Nogard? Why did we see Christian Mosquera starting in the back line? Why? He knew the significance of the moment. He knew the size of the game. And not to underestimate his master, in Pep Guardiola, he decided to go with his elite team in all other positions other than the goalkeeping position. For Ben White, who did not have a very great game, by the way, because he never ventured forward as often as you'd have loved him to help Bukayo Saka, it's because he did not have Yuan Timber. He was out through injury as well. So for those of you that remember, there's a video I did on the channel. You can go over to the channel under the video section. It talks about my worries for Arsenal for the remainder of the season. And in that video, I talk about injuries. At the end of that game, Arsenal had sustained another injury to William Saliba. It's an ankle injury, and therefore is out of the French national team squad for the international break. So you have Mikel Merino out injured, Yuan Timber out injured, your captain Martin Odegaard injured, you have Ebeleche Eze out through injury, and now add William Saliba. Of course, they will be hoping that by the end of the international break, those players will be fine and be ready to get back on and get things going. That will be their hope. But nonetheless, there are still injuries. So, however, all hope is not lost for the Arsenal. They still have that 9-point lead in the Premier League title race. Whether they go on to win it or squander it as well, that's up to them. This season, they've been known to recover really well from defeats and go on good runs. Because prior to yesterday, they had last lost in January against Manchester United by 3-2 at the Emirates. And in that period, they had played about 17 games. So in 17 games, they lost only 1. So that tells you of how good they've been at recovering. So in the aftermath of the international break, they have a quarterfinal game against Southampton in the FA Cup. They have a UEFA Champions League doubleheader against Sporting CP. So that will be a midweek game in Portugal before they play AFC Bournemouth in the Premier League at home, and then play Sporting Lisbon at home before making the trip to the Etihad Stadium. Those are going to be very, very crucial games in terms of how they recover and how the world perceives them. The last thing they would want is to drop any points against Bournemouth or lose any of those games. You wouldn't want to lose to Southampton. You wouldn't want to lose to Sporting CP, whether it's at home or away, because it would impact your psychological confidence in the running for the Premier League title. It is theirs to lose, the Premier League title, and the world knows it. And even Pep Guardiola knows that. But they'll keep putting the pressure on this Arsenal side. And they will go into that game at the Etihad Stadium knowing that we just beat them at Wembley. We can do it again. We just need to stay disciplined enough, be very forward-thinking in terms of being attack-minded as opposed to being a bit conservative, because the way Arsenal plays sometimes is that they're too cautious not to lose it, that it comes at the expense of them not taking the risk to try and win it. So basically, that's where the difference is. And that's why, for me, they lost this Carabao Cup final, So really, there's not much more you can point on to other than that. Of course, the narratives have started in some sections, or they bottled it. It's a final. You win a final, you lose the final. For me, I can't say they bottled it because they were never in the lead. If they had led the game, maybe by 1-0 or by 2-0, I would say they bottled it. And even if it was just a 1-0, I still wouldn't say they bottled it, because if you are a goal up, the same way you found a way to score is the same way your opponent can find a way to score, and it's all back to square one. And then if they go on to score the second, that becomes the difference. So for me, that's where I thought they lost the plot. But overall, I felt it was a good game. It was worthy of a final, especially in the first half. In the second half, Arsenal were a bit conservative. They had to really, really defend well. They struggled to come out. They struggled to, even string a couple of passes in there, because they had to soak in the pressure from Manchester City. And the celebrations from Pep Guardiola tells you how important a game it was for Manchester City and how big a victory it is that it's another season that they go with the title. In other words, they avoided a trophyless season. 2, it's his 5th Carabao Cup final. Victory. He has never lost the Carabao Cup final. Prior to that, Arsenal had lost their last 3 Carabao Cup finals against Chelsea, Birmingham City, and Manchester City. So they lost another one. It's the first trophy that Pep Guardiola won when he came to the UK or in England. That was in 2018 when they beat Arsenal 3-0 in the final. So it's one that holds a certain special value in his sort of space within English football. And then he knows it's not been overall a very good year for them. And they needed to recover from that disappointment of losing to Real Madrid home and away and getting knocked out of the UEFA Champions League. So for me, overall, those are the reasons as to why I thought Arsenal lost the Carabao Cup final. Do let me know what your thoughts are, why you think they lost the final. Do you think it will impact their confidence going forward for the remainder of the season? Because I believe, for me, that given that this comes prior to the international break, they'll have time to go back and rest, recuperate, and then come back perhaps better against Southampton. And for me, I think they need to win their subsequent 4 games. After that, you need to win against Southampton, not just marginally winning, but convincingly so, to sort of send a message. You need to go out to Portugal and win. You need to come back and beat up against Bournemouth. You need to win against Sporting CP. That's the momentum that you need to carry yourself to the Etihad Stadium, because it's going to be a different ball game altogether at the Etihad Stadium. I do not know what players will be available at the time or not available at the time, but if the kind of injuries that they have at the moment are absent in their trip against Manchester City at the Etihad Stadium, it will be a big ask, really, for them to go out there and win on a stadium where they've not won, I think, since 2015, So you wouldn't want to go there when you're missing Martin Odegaard, Eberechi Eze, Yuan Timber, William Saliba, in addition to Mikel Merino, So they would want to avoid that. And of course, it's the international break. All managers will have literally their hearts in their mouths, hoping against hope that their players do not return with injuries from the international break. So, but yeah, your views and thoughts down in the comment section. Otherwise, stay blessed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye for now.